These 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave at Makkedah. And it was told Joshua, "The 5 kings have been found, hidden in the cave at Makkedah." And Joshua said, "Roll great stones against the mouth of the cave, and set men by it to guard them, but do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies, fall upon their rear, do not let them enter their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand." When Joshua and the men of Israel had finished slaying them with a very great slaughter, until they were wiped out, and when the remnant which remained of them had entered into the fortified cities, all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. Not a man moved his tongue against any of the sons of Israel. Then Joshua said, "Open the mouth of the cave, and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave." And they did so, and brought those 5 kings out to him from the cave: the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought those kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel, and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, "Come near, put your feet upon the necks of these kings." Then they came near, and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, "Do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and of good courage, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight." And afterward Joshua struck them and put them to death, and he hung them on 5 trees. And they hung upon the trees until evening. But at the time of the going down of the sun, Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees, and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. And they set great stones against the mouth of the cave, which remain to this very day. And Joshua took Makkedah on that day, and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed every person in it. He left none remaining. And he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua passed on from Makkedah, and all Israel with him, to Libnah, and fought against Libnah. And the Lord gave it also to its king into the hand of Israel. And he struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it. He left none remaining in it. And he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. And Joshua passed on from Libnah, and all Israel with him, to Lachish, and laid siege to it, and assaulted it. And the Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel, and he took it on the 2nd day, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, as he had done to Libnah. Then Horam, king of Gezer, came up to help Lachish, and Joshua struck him and his people until he left none remaining. And Joshua passed on with all Israel from Lachish to Eglon, and they laid siege to it, and assaulted it. And they took it on that day, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it utterly destroyed that day, as he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua went up with all Israel from Eglon to Hebron, and they assaulted it, and took it, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and its king and its towns, and every person in it. He left none remaining, as he had done to Eglon, and utterly destroyed it with every person in it. Then Joshua with all Israel turned back to Debir, and assaulted it, and he took it with its king and all its towns, and they struck them with the edge of the sword, and utterly destroyed every person in it. He left none remaining, as he had done to Hebron, and to Libnah, and its king. So he did to Debir and to its king. So Joshua defeated the whole land, the hill country and the Negeb, and the lowland, and the slopes, and all their kings. He left none remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel commanded. And Joshua defeated them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, and all the country of Goshen, as far as Gibeon. And Joshua took all these things and their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Akshaph, and to the kings who were in the northern hill country, and in the Arabah, south of Chinneroth, and in the lowland, and in Naphoth-dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites, under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. And they came out with all their troops, a great host in number, like the sand that is upon the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. And all these kings joined their forces, and came and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight with Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them, slain, to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses, and burn their chariots with fire." So Joshua came suddenly upon them with all his people of war by the waters of Merom, and fell upon them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel, who struck them and chased them as far as Great Sidon and Misrephothmaim, and eastward as far as the valley of Mizpah. And they struck them until they left none remaining. And Joshua did to them as the Lord bade them. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. And Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor, and struck its king with the sword, for Hazor formerly was the head of all those kingdoms. And they put to the sword all who were in it, utterly destroying them. There was none left that breathed, and he burned Hazor with fire. And all the cities of those kings, and all their kings, Joshua took, and struck them with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded. But none of the cities that stood on the mounts did Israel burn, except Hazor only, that Joshua burned. And all the spoil of these cities and the cattle the sons of Israel took for their booty. But every man they struck with the edge of the sword, until they had destroyed them, and they did not leave any that breathed. As the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So Joshua took all that land, the hill country, and all the Negeb, and all the land of Goshen, and the lowland, and the Arabah, and the hill country of Israel, and its lowland, from Mount Halak, that rises toward Seir, as far as Balagad, in the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. And he took all their kings, and struck them, and put them to death. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the sons of Israel except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. They all took in battle. For it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be utterly destroyed, and should receive no mercy but be exterminated, as the Lord commanded Moses. And Joshua came at that time, and wiped out the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron and Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the sons of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. So Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal allotments. And the land had rest from war. Now these are the kings of the land, whom the sons of Israel defeated, and took possession of their land beyond the Jordan, toward the sunrising, from the valley of the Arnon to Mount Hermon, with all the Arabah eastward. Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon, and ruled from Aroer, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, and from the middle of the valley as far as the river Jabbok, the boundary of the Amorites, that is, half of Gilead, and the Arabah to the sea of Chinneroth, eastward, and in the direction of the Beth Jesimoth, to the sea of the Arabah, the Salt Sea, southward to the foot of the slopes of Pisgah, and Og king of Bashan, one of the remnant of the Rephaim, who dwelt at Ashtaragoth, and at Edrei, and ruled over Mount Hermon, at Selach, and all Bashan to the boundary of the Geshurites, and the Maccathites, and over half of Gilead to the boundary of Sihon, king of Heshbon. Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the sons of Israel defeated them, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave their land for a possession to the Reubenites, and the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And these are the kings of the land whom Joshua and the sons of Israel defeated on the west side of the Jordan, from Balagad, in the valley of Lebanon, to Mount Halak, that rises towards Seir. And Joshua gave their land to the tribes of Israel as a possession according to their allotments, in the hill country, in the lowland, in the Arabah, in the slopes, in the wilderness, and in the Negeb, the land of the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai, which is beside Bethel, 1. The king of Jerusalem, 1. The king of Hebron, 1. The king of Jarmuth, 1. The king of Lachish, 1. The king of Eglon, 1. The king of Gezer, 1. The king of Debir, 1. The king of Geder, 1. The king of Hormah, 1. The king of Arad, 1. The king of Libnah, 1. The king of Adullam, 1. The king of Makkedah, 1. The king of Bethel, 1. The king of Tappuah, 1. The king of Hepher, 1. The king of Aphek, 1. The king of Lasharon, 1. The king of Madon, 1. The king of Hazor, 1. The king of Shimron-Meron, 1. The king of Ashaph, 1. The king of Tanakh, 1. The king of Megiddo, 1. The king of Kadesh, 1. The king of Jokanam in Carmel, 1. The king of Dor in Nephath-dor, 1. The king of Goim in Galilee, 1. The king of Tirzah, 1. In all, 31 kings. A Psalm of Asaph. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the angels, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say, you are gods, Son of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like men, and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for to you belong all the nations. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. He also told them a parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully taught, will be like his teacher. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, Brother, let me take out the speck that is in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. For no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good man out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil man out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house, who dug deep and laid the foundation upon rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against the house, and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But he who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation, against which the stream broke, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. It is important to find time to take stock of our lives, to assess our accomplishments and our failures, and to measure ourselves against the goals we have set. At the end of Joshua 12, we see a counting up, a stock-taking of the Israelites' conquest of Canaan. Amazingly, Joshua and his army defeat 31 kings. They bear good fruit. Jesus teaches that a tree is known by its own fruit. This saying is directed against hypocrisy, which is an outward show of righteousness not accompanied by interior virtue. Jesus explains that authentic virtue flows from the inside out. The truly faithful are not speck-finding, judgmental grudge holders, but generous, forgiving, and obedient to God. Their lives are built upon a rock foundation. Joshua demonstrates obedience to God in leading the conquest of Canaan, and his efforts meet with success. Our own seeking to fulfill the Lord's command will only come to fruition if we truly allow his grace to transform our hearts, so that his righteousness flows out of us. Pause and take stock. Are you living your life as both a hearer and a doer of the word?